Are we started?
If the screen pops up. We are on. We are live.
Okay, so where we left off last time, we were gonna talk about some machine elves and DMT.
Yeah,
Right?
we're shamelessly ripping off Joe Rogan. That's correct.
Yes. Okay.
So,
So what are these machine elves that you got that you've been researching?
well, I'm gonna have to share my screen here for you. So basically, the machine elves fall under a category of what we would call DMT.
Yeah, people like see entities and like elves and shit. I've heard of like elves, not machine elves.
So they go by multiple names. Have call them the clockwork elves. So they go by clockwork elves, machine elves, DMT elves. Yeah, so here you go. Machine elves, DMT elves, like a bunch of random stuff. And basically, I do not want to grow shrooms. And essentially, they are. There's this artist, I can't remember his name, but this is probably one of the more. I think David Quick is the guy who makes all the DMT art, but they look somewhat like this. But it's probably this. Yeah, so they look like these weird, hyper-dimensional, like fractal things, you know. And I'm not entirely sure why they're called elves, but everybody who meets with them claims that, they can speak to you. They give you knowledge about certain things in the real world. But oh yeah, this one's pretty famous too. But apparently, if you ever ask them a question about like something like the secrets of life or whatever, you won't actually really get like a concrete answer on it. They kind of already only tell you things that you already know, which kind of leads people to believe that it is only happening in your head, right? Because if you could walk away with knowledge that you didn't have before, then maybe there would be some validity to the fact that these things exist outside of the human experience, but nobody really has before.
But isn't it like, oh, people get into like, because you have to like break through, right?
Yeah. So that's
So you have to like
generally.
break through to see them, but it's like when people do like talk to these entities, don't they like figure out the meaning of life and shit, and they have all these answers, but then when they come back, they forget everything. That's what I've heard.
I mean, the best way that I've ever heard it described is like a dream, right? Where you can sometimes when you dream, you live like multiple lifetimes within your dream, right? Or you like dream that you have like an entire family or something, or you go on some massive quest. But then when you wake up, you don't remember like any of it, right? It's a similar thing there, and it actually makes sense with that analogy because DMT is released in trace amounts when you sleep.
Okay.
I think it's produced in pineal gland, which is also a big thing, right? Because the pineal gland, are you familiar with the lore behind it?
Sounds like penis gland.
It does, yeah. So the pineal gland. Oh, where do I even begin with this thing? Basically, with this, there is a lot of discussion that the pineal gland is essentially the third eye, right? That it is where your third eye exists, and funny enough, it is sort of if you've seen diagrams of like the third eye or people who open their third eye, right? It's always like in the middle of their forehead, and that's exactly where your pineal gland is located. And it's supposed, or well, people theorized for a long time that's where DMT came from, and that is essentially that gland in itself is what sort of allows you to spiritually transcend or whatever, right? Like that is sort of the spiritual part of your brain, right? And funny enough, this I actually just found this earlier. I don't know if you're watching my screen, but are you familiar with the pineal gland right here? Are you familiar with the Eye of Horus?
Pull up a picture. Let me see. I'm watching the stream on so I can look at the chat if there's anybody
Okay.
that wants to come in.
So this is the Eye of Horus.
Oh, I've seen
Um,
this before. I feel like I've seen
Yeah.
this in like a cartoon in Cartoon Network.
Yeah. It's a famous symbol that is representative of Horus from the Egyptian religion, right? And Horus's whole thing was that he was able to speak magic words, right? That he sort of had this knowledge, this ability to see past the veil, that kind of thing. And that's what made him wise, made him eligible for the chief spot of the Egyptian pantheon. And funny enough, been some people that are pointing out that the Eye of Horus looks suspiciously similar to the pineal gland,
Okay.
leading some people to believe that the Egyptians had an understanding of what this pineal gland did, right? And they directly related it to the Eye of Horus, which is sort of the symbol for extra dimensional knowledge, right? Like this Eye of Horus represents essentially having true sight, right? The concept of true sight is you can, see through the veil.
And
Right?
that
So
gland releases DMT.
it does, yeah. So that was actually proven recently. See if I can pull up the paper here. Probably put this side by side so you'll see.
I wonder how much salvia relates to all of this.
Salvia is a little different.
Because like I
don't.
remember I was watching this TikTok the other day about this guy. He was like on Joe Rogan, and he took
Mhm.
salvia, and he literally like transported like underwater and like had an entire life for like 8 months and shit like that. And that shit is kind of like a dream too, bro, because he was literally underwater. He had a whole life, literally 8 months living down there and just fucking boom. That's some like dream type shit.
All right. Let me see what it does. But what, like, chemically does it
Yeah,
actually do?
psychedelic. It's a psychedelic, but
But I'm curious because psychoactive properties. The main ingredient in salvia is salvinorin as. Let me see if I can read this. Salvinorin a salvinorins, huh? A group of natural compounds and their structural analog, as diterpenoid furanocletones. Okay.
random shit.
What part of the brain does it actually target?
The fucking penile gland, bro.
The penis gland. There's a Wired article here. Oh, I guess they did an fMRI scan. Are there any pictures?
All right, let me search up. Is salvia related to DMT? Uh, they work differently and are used for different purposes. DMT is considered far more powerful psychedelic than salvia. While both produce hallucinations, different depths and types of hallucinations are experienced. Um, I guess I just give you a similar experience, but they work differently. So I guess they're
All I
not
know
related.
is I did it once in college with Frank, and I swear to God, I thought I was gonna die. Like I did not like that shit.
I have some right here
Do you?
that John gave me a long ass time ago.
It was not a great experience. I just remember like because we hit it like once and then nothing happened. We hit it a second time and then nothing happened. And then we're like, all right, let's just fill up the bowl and hit it and then see what happens. We do it, and then both at the same time, right? So we both fucking get smacked. And then I remember like laying down in my bed, and like having a panic attack, right? And trying to do my best to like sit up in my bed, but I could not get my stomach muscles to work. And I felt like this massive weight on my chest. I'm like, I'm gonna fucking die. I'm gonna like suffocate and perish right here in my bed. And then eventually it like sort of wore off and I like shot up in the bed. Not a good experience. I didn't like it, but
A lot of people
their own, I guess.
like it, dude. Like it takes over like everything, and it just like you can't even talk, bro. I had like a little bit, and just because it wasn't really strong, but I had like a little bit, and I felt like I was going like this kind of, and then I felt like somebody was pushing up on me, and I was like just constantly just gonna go like flipping over, and it was like kind of hard to talk at the same time. That's all I experienced, but
Not a fan personally. But I don't know why. But this, I mean, yeah, I feel like I've talked about this with you before. But are you familiar with the concept of astral projection?
all the fucking out of body shit where like
Yeah,
what was it again?
astral projection. Here, if you're watching my stream,
Yeah.
T-Rexes. So basically, we go to the Wikipedia page, but images are a little better. Not really.
You could like train yourself to do it, right?
Yeah, I tried a couple of times.
Yeah,
I went on this whole rabbit hole. Hey, used in esotericism fits the podcast. And it basically the overarching theory, and the interesting part about it as well, is there are all these accounts of this occurring from different cultures, right? You have ancient Egyptian, Amerindian, so the American Indian, Inuit, Hindu, Japanese, Judeo-Christian, Taoist, Western esoteric. Like a lot of major world religions have some concept of this, right?
Yeah.
And ostensibly what it is, like you said, is it's a way by which you can separate what's known as your astral body from your physical body, right? Take off my glasses. And there have been some really interesting experiments done with it. I have some leaked government documents that basically what they would do is they would have these, and some of these experiments were in hospitals where they'd have these people that claim to be able to astral project, and they'd like set some stuff up on the roof of the hospital, right? And they'd say, all right, well, if you can astral project, project up to the roof of the hospital and tell me what's up there. And all of them were able to, right? They were able to detail exactly what went on there. My favorite piece of lore about this is, and it sounds so ridiculous, I don't know that it's true, but there is this guy, I like the story nonetheless. There's this guy, Robert. So this guy apparently worked with the CIA, and he was... Oh, it's just getting fucking gold. Robert Golf. Project, I guess. Glass camera project, Robert Golf. No, I'm not getting any good pictures for it, but basically, the lore behind it, right? Ah, yes, the unspeakable conspiracy. God was raped.
What?
That's just the YouTube video that's on this. Anyway, basically what the lore behind it says is that this guy, Robert Golf, was able to astral project, right? So the CIA was able to hook up essentially a mind-reading device to him that allowed them to view what he saw in his, right? So he could astral project into a room, and they could look through his eyes and essentially see the room. Right?
Yeah.
So the reason it's called the glass camera, right, is because it's a camera that's not physically visible, right? And the basic idea was, they have them like project into like Soviet meetings and then report back what they're doing, right? And apparently they did that a couple of times. But the most interesting part of the story, in my opinion, is apparently during one of these operations, I guess you could say, died. And then they live streamed his consciousness going to heaven to a TV in the CIA's office. So apparently they had found footage of heaven, right? And then I guess the lore goes that the Catholic Church found out about it, and just yoinked it and put it into the Catholic vaults. Right, so according to this story, the Catholic Church has found footage of heaven, which I just find that hilarious.
So who has this footage?
The Catholics, I guess. The Pope. It's in the Vatican
The
archives.
Pope has it.
The Vatican archives are fucking insane.
Why wouldn't he want to show everybody so they could be like, Catholics are the best. We know it. We've seen
Well,
heaven.
the Vatican archives are weird, right? Because they keep a bunch of like holy stuff in there, essentially. Man, there's no good pictures of them. They're very much locked down, but they keep like artifacts and stuff. You know, some people say they have like the Holy Grail or whatever, but basically log into private area. Oh, I thought that this was like a Vatican archive login that I could try to crack. I kind of want to hit this website with my Kali instance and see if I can break into their online archives. I mean, just kidding. Just kidding. I wouldn't do that. I forgot why. But essentially, oh my god, what? A new book examined Pope Pius the XII's role in the Holocaust. Good God. Anyway. Oh yeah, here we go. 15 historic wonders housed in the Vatican's archives. So the Papal Bull from this is the one where they threw Martin Luther in this.
Wait, so
this
who
was the
did
praise
like
bowl.
the whole experimenting thing with the going up to heaven footage? Like, was it the government that did that?
Yeah, apparently it was the CIA that did it.
And they got their shit fucking took?
Apparently, yeah. Well, do you know how powerful the Catholic Church is? It is ridiculously powerful.
I know it was powerful.
It's still ridiculously powerful.
What?
You know how many people are Catholic in the world?
I mean, yeah, but like, what can they really do? You know,
A lot. They could do a lot. Catholic. How many people are Catholic? Right. So let's compare. Yeah, 1.3 billion people are Catholic, right? And if you compare that to just the population of the United States, which is about 300 million, that is over 1 billion more people that are Catholic than are in the US. Maybe they don't have any direct governance over the US, but they have a lot of influence, is the point, right?
Yeah, but have they recently used that influence to like do crazy shit?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Because before they were like, kill everybody that isn't Catholic, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's more like, what would you say? It's more like a subtle thing, right? Like I don't think that they're necessarily going out and being like, oh yeah, burn these people at the stake, right? But they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of influence, right? So you don't really want to be on like the bad side of the Catholic Church, right? Especially if you consider how many like American politicians are probably Catholic, right? And how many people who work in the government are probably Catholic, right? Like it would not be a great idea to be on there. Put it that way.
True.
But I do agree with you. They were way more influential in the past. But like at the same time, that influence does kind of carry over, right? Because if you have these like really old political families that had close ties with the church in the past, they probably still do now, you know?
True. Damn, son.
Wait, what were we talking about before? I kind of wanted to jump. Oh yeah, astral projection. So I tried this one. I went on this big rabbit hole into it, and I got really interested in the idea. I wanted to try it out for myself, and I did it, or I kind of did it. I got close, right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna pull this up because I want to draw you what I saw. Now the really interesting part about it was when I was doing this, it was at first you have to start off with like really deep meditation, right? Which in a sense is kind of good that I tried it because it got me used to sort of meditate, which is useful in general. But basically, the process is like this. I've heard a couple of methodologies for how you can do it. The one that I subscribe to personally was I don't have Paint on this computer because I have Linux, but try to draw you this. Basically, you're, I don't know, better color. Give me this one. An airbrush. Something a little thicker. Yeah, that's fine, I guess. So this is you, right? You're laying down in your bed, right? You got your nuts are right here. Your dick is right there, right? And basically you're laying down and you're meditating, right? And the basic idea is that and I'm gonna put this in a different color. I'm gonna put it in like a purple to represent like spiritual, right? It's not real. As you're meditating, you imagine that there's this rope dangling down. And then you also imagine that your hands are grabbing onto this rope and you're like climbing up the rope. Okay? And essentially the logic behind it is you're like using your astral body, quote unquote, to like pull you out of your physical body. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I did that, and you also meditate really deeply at the same time. So I was doing that, and I saw like some of the most vivid, just like mind images I think I've ever seen. I don't know how to describe it. Like the images that were flashing through my mind were like as vivid as like a dream. And I wasn't asleep. I was just sitting there chilling, right? But there was that. My body started to feel like really heavy. I started to feel like these weird vibrations. And the part that really sealed the deal that maybe there was more to this was I remember that there was this strange pressure that was building up in my head. It almost felt like if you go like too deep in a pool, right? You start to feel like that pressure building up in your ears. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It was like that, but it was throughout my entire brain. My entire mind palace was being filled with this like Titanic submarine level of pressure, right? Like I thought I was going to implode. But anyway, so it keeps building and building and building until eventually I literally hear, I don't know if I heard it, or if I imagined it or whatever, but a sound like a visible pop and then like a tss, like a hissing happened, right? And then all the pressure went away, right? And the images that I was seeing got more and more vivid. And I still think about this and I'm like, what the fuck like caused that? You know, it was just such a strange occurrence. And then like I felt myself getting close to actually being able to do it. And a few seconds later, the thing that really fucked me up was I was sitting there, you know, just vibing out, trying to do this astral projection. And one of the things they talked about in the documents that I read was basically that, and this is according to the hippies, so take it with a grain of salt, but basically that in the astral realm, right, you have these sort of vibrational levels, right? They mostly correspond emotions with certain vibrational levels, right? And apparently the lower vibration, the lower frequency with which something in the astral realm vibrates, the more likely it is to be malicious, right? And generally they assign emotions to these vibrational levels as well. Like, for instance, anger, or like they're very similar to the seven deadly sins actually, because it's like wrath, lust, and envy are supposedly, and fear as well, are supposedly very low level vibrational emotions, right? And if you focus on these emotions, you'll encounter more of these low level vibrational entities, right? Does that make any sense?
So if you're like, so for example, you're like astral projecting, and then if you focus on those low level emotions, you're gonna feel more of those same type of entities.
Yeah, ostensibly, right? Because it's basically, it gets very spiritual, right? In the sort of like, you know, you see like a girl on Twitter who's like drinking her Starbucks, right? And she's like, I'm manifesting that this day is going to be great, right? Like that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? But it's literally in according to these people in the astral realm, that's something you can legitimately do, right? Like if you feel a certain way, if you think a certain thing is going to happen, it will happen.
So
Like it's sort of
manifestation is real.
sure. I
What do
mean,
you think
maybe.
about that? What do you think about that?
I think there's definitely something to it, right? Because I mean, there's so much that we don't understand about how consciousness works, right?
Yeah.
And just the concept of the soul in general, we have no idea what that is. We've tried to pinpoint the location where consciousness is in the brain, and we haven't been able to do it, right? The smartest people in the world are working on this shit, and we have no idea where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of gets into the concept of there's sort of two schools of thought when it comes to, and the first one is that it's purely a physical thing, right? That consciousness is produced in the brain, right? And the second one, and the one that I subscribe to a little bit more, is it's officially called mind-body dualism, right? And basically, what it's saying is that consciousness is not produced in the brain. The brain is just a receiver for consciousness, right? It's like if you have one of those old school TVs that receive things via an antenna, right? The brain would be that antenna, right? The show is not being made in the TV, right? It's coming from somewhere else. You're just able to perceive it through the TV, right? That's basically what they're saying your brain is. And there's some counter arguments to that that say, oh, well, you know, if we change things in your brain, then your personality changes, right? And the counter argument to that from people who believe in mind body dualism is they go back to the TV analogy, right? They're like, you know, sure, right? Like I could take an ice pick and lobotomize you, right? And yeah, you'd act different. But the same thing can be said about the old TV, right? If you go into the old TV and you start messing around with the wires, you start bending the antennas, the picture is going to look different. You can change the picture. You might even be able, if you're smart enough, to get a totally different picture playing on the TV entirely, right? But you haven't changed the signal, right? You've just changed how the receiver is processing the signal. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I subscribe more to that one because I can't exactly explain why. It just feels more correct, you know? Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like, even with things like, well, I think a lot about like how, have you ever had like a friend or like someone you know, and you meet a dog or you meet an animal of some kind, right? And the dog or the animal just does not like this guy, right? Like hates this guy, right? And at first you're like, oh, come on, man, like he's cool, right? But then later you find out the dog was completely fucking right about whoever they didn't like, right? Like I can't tell you how many times that's happened, right? Where if a dog or a cat or some kind of animal is just not vibing with a person whatsoever, 9 times out of 10 they're right, you know?
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, how the fuck do they know? You know, like where are they getting that knowledge from? Is it something about like their body language? Is it just how they sound? But that doesn't make any sense to me because it's like you can change your body language, right? Like you can change how you sound, but the dog will always fucking know. You know, like you're not hiding that from me. And to me, that indicates that like the dog must be able to perceive some other element of the person's being, right? If you want to get all spiritual, maybe they can see their soul, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, they're like, yo, you got an ugly ass soul. I don't fuck with that.
Okay.
So that, and just, I don't know, man, there's so much weird shit when it comes to consciousness and just the interaction with the spiritual and all
But
that. Like we have
you though, like, would you say that you believe in manifestation?
to a certain degree,
It's like
yeah.
a certain degree. So, cause it's like, you know, like you said, you're changing like the receiver a little bit, right? Like you're kind of changing your your view on some things, and you're kind of like saying like, oh, I'm gonna try my best to actually do whatever you're manifesting, right?
Yeah, well, it's not only that, but like I'd say like 90 to 95% of the human experience takes place in your brain, you know? Like so much of what you think about yourself and what like your confidence in being able to do something, that affects how you behave to a massive degree, right? Like do something like think about something as simple as like maybe not as simple, but as basic as like picking up a woman at a bar, right? Like if you go up to her and you have no confidence in yourself, right? Like you're like, there's no way this is gonna work out, right? It's gonna reject me or whatever. She probably will, right? But if you're more confident about it and you're like, no, I can do this, right? This is all me. I'm not gonna say that she won't. She still might, but your chances are higher, right? Like
Yeah.
you simply believing in yourself and having the sort of mental schema that you can achieve this, right, is powerful to some degree. So, and it's also like people who get out of depression and are able to turn that depression around into a motivating force. Like that's something to be said as well, right? Like you can, it's a lot about just how you perceive your own existence, right? That changes how things affect. So that's the first layer, and the second layer I would say would be like if there is some kind of if the spiritual does have an effect on the real world and it does exist for that matter, right? Then the thoughts that you have and the what would you say the things that you believe are going to happen, if that exists in some outer realm somewhere, right? Then maybe the ripple effect of you believing those things will happen actually has some effect on the real world, right? That I wouldn't say that's too outside of the realm of possibility, right? Like it could happen. There's no evidence to support it, but I mean, people have been thinking that for a long time, and there might be something to it. I'm not going to say 100% whether or not I believe it, but just for the simple fact that like believing something good will happen for you is will make it more likely to happen than if it didn't, right? I think that I believe in manifesting more in that sense than I do in like you're literally affecting the spiritual realm. But maybe you never know, right? Like it might be both.
Cause like psychics, do you believe in psychics?
It's a tough one. Um,
I think they're all bullshit, bro. I ain't gonna lie to you. I don't
I
fuck
mean,
with them.
I think like 90% of them are, right? And
You thought so there might be like one or two, like some out there that are like actually about their shit.
how do I explain this? I think I don't think that like the psychics that you go to and they're like, oh, I'm getting Deborah. Do
Like,
you have a Deborah in your life?
yeah,
Right? Like they do the
yeah,
cold reading.
yeah.
I think that that's horseshit, right? And I think that if there is anybody who has a sort of like psychic connection to some outer realm, I don't think you're going to get any concrete information out of it, right? Because I think that if there is a spiritual realm, it's probably so fucking like different and just like alien, for lack of a better term, than the one we live in, that if you were to glean some information out of it, I'm not even entirely sure that you'd be able to understand it. Right? It's kind of going back to the DMT trips, right? Like people go in there and they get told things, but then they come back and they're like, I have no idea how that applies to my life. Right? Like it's just it's a totally different realm of perception, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
It's giving your mom died. Your mom died? Your mom
Your
died.
mom is the date October 1st significant to you at all? I don't know. I think personally, we'd be seeing if there was concrete information that you can glean from it, we would see at least one story about someone who used that to win the lottery, right? Like you'd have to, right? But I don't know necessarily that.
But then the
How would I explain
spirits
this?
wouldn't fuck with them, and then they're using their powers for evil. So then they're like lose their powers.
Well, I think it's more that like how do I explain this? I think it's kind of like if there is sort of a beyond realm, right? If consciousness does come from an outer place, I think it would be like fifth dimensional, right? Is it like are you familiar with the concept? Like think about 5D chess, right? We're going back to this. Like, so the fourth dimension is commonly thought of as like duration, right?
Yeah.
So if you could travel back in time to the fourth dimension, you could like change what you had for breakfast this morning, right?
Yeah.
But the fifth dimension is commonly thought of as like branching paths away from a current point in time, right? So for instance, in the fifth dimension, there would exist a multiverse where you had any numerable possible things for breakfast, right? So if you were going to have waffles or cereal and you chose cereal, well, a universe exists where you had waffles, right? Does
Yeah.
that make any sense?
Yeah.
So if you think about it from like 5D chess, right? What happens if you can move your queen back in time on the board? It makes a new dimension. Right?
Yeah.
It makes a branching path from that point in time where history is changed, right? Where the dimensions are different. And there's a lot of time travel media that's like that as well, right? Where you go back in time. You're not changing time in your own timeline. You're going back to a point in your timeline and creating a new branching path from that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think with psychics in particular, if you were able to get some information from outside of your timeline, right, that would change the course of your timeline, right? Like that, you would branch off from that, and things like if you were able to say see ahead in the fourth dimension, right, and you were able to take that knowledge and bring it back to your dimension, the shit wouldn't play out the same, right? Much the same way that if you move your queen back in time on the board, it's not the same game, right? It's different now. You've changed it.
Yeah. So speaking of all
I'm
this,
gonna get some chips and salsa real quick.
okay, bet. Can you still hear me, or can I hear you? I can. I probably can't hear you. It's interesting though.
All right.
So speaking about all this magic shits, what is this hermeticism?
Ah, okay. Good. This is a rabbit hole. Basically, where do I even begin with this?
Is it magic? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of magic?
Magic to be like it's
So it's like
such,
everything.
basically a lot of. So basically, there was. So this first popped up when. We need to start with this guy here, right? And this guy Hermes Trismegistus, right? This is the sort of the main character of Hermeticism. This guy, nobody's sure if he existed, first of all, but if he did exist, he wrote these books. One of them I think is called the Emerald Tablet, and another one is referred to as like the 7 or the 14 Hermetic Principles or something like that. Basically, it is esotericism and magic combined. It attempts to explain how the spiritual world affects the real world, right? And this Emerald Tablet is pretty interesting. I don't remember when it was unearthed. So this is the Emerald Tablet here. And it was discovered in a tomb, and it was supposedly the tomb of Hermes Trismegistus, and it was discovered. Yeah, so according to the lore, this was found in 200 to 800, or it was written in 200 to 800 BC, or no, Common Era, yeah. So basically, it detailed a bunch of ways to do magical shit, and it essentially promised to unearth the secrets of the universe itself. let me pull up my actual notes.
So
On
what's
that.
common era like while Jesus was alive?
After Jesus was alive. So it's basically BC. It's one of those things where they're like trying to get away from like naming it after Jesus, right? To
Oh,
bridge the gap between people
so
who are not.
200 years after Jesus.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
And the interesting part about this was,
But you know what fucked me up? I realized that Jesus was alive during the Roman Empire.
yeah, they're the ones who killed him.
Yeah. I didn't realize that till like last year.
And then, after that, for hundreds of years, Christians were hunted down like dogs and killed in various horrible ways.
Mm.
That's why, like the lore behind, I think it's John the Baptist, the guy who was hung upside down or crucified upside down.
Oh, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So what does this? So what does this tablet say?
Let me pull up my notes here. So, tablet has had some rough translations.
What language was it in? Greek.
I don't remember.
Well, it says originated as a syncretic combination of the Greek
Oh,
god.
yeah. No, I remember what it was. So the Hermes Trismegistus, he gets his name from the Greek god of knowledge, Hermes, right? And the
Oh,
Egyptian god of knowledge. And apparently the book originated from, there was a time period where Greece was essentially, for lack of a better term, kind of clapping Egypt's cheeks.
okay.
They have them occupied, and there was a big mixing of cultures between the Greek people and the Egyptian people. And it was said that at that time, that this was when Hermes Trismegistus rose up and figured out the secrets of the universe, essentially. And he's said to have done things like achieve immortality, right? Um, I think he was the original creator of the Philosopher's Stone, if you're familiar with what that is.
I've seen Full Metal Alchemist.
Okay, so you kind of know. The Philosopher's Stone was something that the alchemists were going sicko mode for hundreds of years on. And
Yeah.
Hermeticism is also based in, or alchemy is based in Hermeticism to a significant degree. And
Okay.
the interesting part, in my opinion, about Hermeticism is, so Hermeticism influenced alchemy, and alchemy influenced modern science, right? Basically, the way that a lot of alchemy went was they would have these super rigorous procedures to perform these sort of alchemical transmutations. And that sort of level of repeatability and rigor was what influenced the modern scientific.
Okay.
So, let's see. So this book was written in, it's compiled in Arabic. Yeah, so it got mistranslated a couple of times, but I think it was originally written in, I can't remember the name of the language, but it was a language that was essentially translating the Egyptian hieroglyphic language into Greek characters, and it wasn't like perfect, and because of that, there have been a few mistranslations along the way, but so, let me pull up the actual information it has in here. Yeah, so here are the Arabic translations. So, yeah, it mentions the history of Thoth, the Atlantean, who was apparently Thoth, the Egyptian god, came from Atlantis, according to this.
Okay.
And
Atlantis is in the Middle East.
exactly. Oh my god, there's actually, hold on. This reminds me of another bit of schizo lore that I encountered. or on the topic.
Atlanta.
Yeah. So there is this place in the Sahara called Richat, right? Some people call it the Eye of the Sahara. And if you compare it to the original diagrams of Atlantis by Plato and some other people, it looks eerily similar, right? Sort of this ringed city type of diagram. It looks very similar to this Richat, which is commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara. And
Oh.
led some people to believe that these are the ruins of Atlantis. That it wasn't necessarily sunk, it was more got its cheeks clapped by ancient global warming. Because the Sahara used to be a desert. Or, sorry, a jungle.
Where is the Sahara?
Northern Africa.
Oh, okay. Oh, so it's like Egypt and shit and like Libya. Okay.
So, I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like right over here.
Oh, and that part? Okay.
So, where were we? Oh yeah, Emerald Tablet.
Yeah, what does that shit say, bro?
It basically, I think it just details the history of thought. Kind of seems like what it's doing here. Actually, I haven't read the whole thing. But,
Okay, so how does this relate to magic?
well, oh, yeah, this is a big one. So, it more or less diagrams the sort of different principles of Hermeticism, right? So we have what's called 7 Hermetic principles, right? And the first one is the principle of mentalism. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, but it basically just said it with regards to manifesting. But it basically says that the principle of mentalism says that everything exists in the mind. Right? The universe is mental, and all matter is an illusion.
Okay.
That everything is spiritual. Everything that exists outside of the spiritual is fake, essentially. And there's also this one. This one is probably the most famous. It said it. You might have heard it before, but it is the principle of correspondence, or as it's commonly referred to, as above, so below. And basically, what it means is the material and spiritual worlds are reflections of one another, right? So as something happens in spiritual world, it is reflected in the physical world, and vice versa. Also kind of relating to the principle of manifestation.
Okay.
So, this one is interesting. When I was first researching this one, I thought it was. I'll talk about it after I explain it. But basically, there is the principle of vibration. Getting into some vibrator territory here.
Frequency shit.
Yeah. It states that nothing rests, everything moves and vibrates. Everything is in constant motion and interconnected. And that this vibration is sort of the foundation of existence itself, right?
I mean, I guess, yeah, because like atoms and shit have electrons that be like moving shit, right?
But the part that really interested me about this is fundamentally quantum field theory. And quantum field theory is a little weirdo mode. It's hard to understand, but see if I can find a good picture of it. Oh, I don't know how to explain this. This shit is ridiculously complicated. I did some research on it, but here are just some of the formulas in case you were, curious. But
okay.
Basically what it is have you ever heard that, quantum particles are both waves and particles at the same time. Have you ever heard that?
I don't know if I have.
Okay. So the best demonstration of this is this here. So the double slit experiment is weird. Basically, what they did, very simply, let me see if I can find a good, this is probably best, is they had a piece of paper and they put these two rectangular slits in it, right? And behind this piece of paper, they had a little back wall, right, where they would observe the pattern that would show up on the other side. And if they only behaved as particles, you would just see two bars here, right, where the light came through, right?
Yeah.
But instead, what they saw is this thing referred to as an interference pattern, right? And basically, what that means is all of these light pillars here, essentially, represent locations where the waves could go. So basically, yeah, this is a good one. So you have the maximum probability that the light waves would hit there, minimum probability, i.e. there's no light waves hitting that, maximum, minimum, and all that, right? So you shoot these photons through these double slits, and they act as waves. They don't act as particles. And what they are waves of is the probability that a photon will exist at that point, right? So it's a bit weird to understand, but essentially, all of the quantum particles are not particles per se, but they are waves. They are a field. And the field is constantly vibrating and oscillating. And at points where the field has a higher frequency, that means that the particle is more likely to exist at that location, right?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So you have all these particles here, right? And they perform their interference pattern. So the waves interfere with each other, right? Are you familiar with the concept of constructive interference and destructive interference?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we'll pull this one up next. So basically, so the reason that this is called an interference pattern is for this phenomenon here, where basically, if you have, yeah, here we go. Not great. Yeah, this is fine. So basically, if you have waves, right, and the waves, see how these waves, their peaks line up at the same places and their troughs line up at the same places, right?
Yeah.
So the highs of these waves are both the same. What that does is, if you combine these two waves together, produces constructive interference, which means that the frequency of these waves is added together. But if it's the opposite, right, where the highs line up with the lows and the lows line up with the highs, it's destructive interference. And for instance, one thing that a place that this is commonly used is with audio engineering. When you're setting up speaker systems for a stadium or just anything, if you have multiple speakers, you need to essentially do some math to plot out where the best location for these speakers is, right? Because if you right, because if you have you right, because if you have you the Twitch is echoing. Anyway, so because if you have two speakers that are at a perfect distance for this destructive interference to happen, then you can, even though both speakers are producing sound, they'll wipe each other out.
It'll be like lower sound.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. So when you're setting up speakers, you ideally want this constructive interference. Because then you can get essentially twice the volume out of it. So the same thing happens with this, right? Because these behave as waves, where there's destructive interference, you see no light, right? But where there's constructive interference, you see light, because they behave as waves, right? Just like with the speakers. So that's how these interference patterns get formed. The waves are interfering with each other. And all of quantum field theory is like that. It's all just, according to quantum field theorists, the entire universe, so all the particles that make up everything, are just fields. And whether or not something exists, like an electron, or light, or the quarks that make up your atoms, right? Whether or not it exists is its vibrational pattern in this field, right? For instance, there's this thing called the Higgs field, right? And the Higgs field only interacts with certain particles. And then basically the only particles it interacts with are those that have mass. So I think those are called leptons. And those are things like quarks. The stuff that makes up like you, right? And everything else that's physical and has mass, right? And these particles interacting with the Higgs field is what creates mass. It's what stops you from traveling at the speed of light at all times, right? If your particles did not interact with this field, you would not exist. So that's what was really interesting to me about this everything is vibrations concept from Hermeticism, right? Because it's like, they were right, like they hit that one on the money. Everything is just vibrations interacting with it.
Okay. So that was one of the things that was said on the tablet and stuff, or what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's I'm reading off what they're called is the 7 Hermetic Principles.
Okay, so how did they use this? So how can they manipulate this shit to make magic?
Well, if I knew, I'd probably be rich.
But like, is there theories and shit?
There are theories. A lot of it boils down to alchemy, right? They would try to use these principles to do alchemical stuff. Because basically all alchemy was some guy had like a lot of iron or whatever, and he's like, man, it'd be really cool if this was gold, right?
Yeah.
It basically be like if you had random stuff sitting around the house and you dedicated your entire life into being able to figure out how to transmutate your used napkins into real money, right? That's basically what the alchemists were up to. Come to think of it, Belle Delphine is kind of an alchemist. She found a way to turn her used bathwater into money. That's kind of an alchemical process, right? But anyway, let's see. So there are all these books that go into this hermetic magic. Here we go. Alchemy is a big one. As far as I understand, it was mostly alchemy where they implemented this. But there were all these other movements of essentially Western magic. It was mostly something that happened in the West. Like the East had some different thoughts as to what exactly constituted magic. Their stuff is really interesting too, because instead of like turning metal into gold, they would like transmutate their souls into like giga souls. So they tried to do alchemy like within their own body, using like chi stuff. Anyway, that's another topic. But basically, as far as I understand, it was mostly used in alchemical stuff.
Okay.
Oh god, there's also Gnosticism, which is a whole other topic. Are you familiar with Gnosticism? You might find this interesting.
Give me a rundown.
Okay, give me a second here.
Like a quick 1-2.
So, Gnosticism is how do I even fucking begin this? It's a branch of Christianity. When Christianity first was popping off, yeah, weird, right? When Christianity was first popping off, right, there were a bunch of different branches that popped up because Jesus kind of just showed up and was like, "Hey, I'm the Son of God. You got some water? I'll make that into wine." Right? Like he didn't elaborate. He didn't write the Bible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people that interpreted it differently. And the basic rundown of Gnosticism is that the real world is evil. That's the biggest summation I could come up with, right? That the God of the real world is not capital G God, right?
Okay.
The God of the real world is the child of one of God's children. If that makes any sense. So,
Huh?
yeah, here we go. So, you have. How do I even begin with this? It's so fucking insane. See if I can find the Pantheon. This one will make a little bit more sense because I can diagram. Okay, here we go. So, no, this doesn't make any sense either.
So is it like there's a world that the capital G God made, but then he had a son, and the son was like, I'm gonna make my own world.
Yes and no. It was basically that I'm trying to find the Pantheon here so that I can explain it, but all of this shit is so goddamn confusing. Where do I find this? There's a picture that I'm looking for specifically. Okay, I'll just explain it. I can actually diagram it. Here we go. Pull up paint again. So, you've got. Turn down my brush size here. So you've got Big Boy God up here, right? And he exists in this. He's like this whole thing, but he also we'll put him like right here, right? So this is big old God man, right? He exists in this place that is called the Pleroma, and the Pleroma is a perfect holy world, right? Like there's no. It's you could basically think of it as heaven, right? So up here, this will be the all this PL, right? And he exists here, and then he created like a wife for himself, and they had babies, and then they created the son, right? So his wife is known as the Barbella, which is basically like the feminine version of God's consciousness. So he had sex with himself, and created like smaller God who is also him. But on top of that, he created, and I can't remember what these things are called. See if I can. This will be Gnosticism. Oh yeah, the eons. So the eons are basically like these 12 angels that God created, right? And each angel, it's actually 24, but because each one, much like him, has a feminine and a masculine side, right? So, he created all them. He's got his Barbella, he's got his son, he's got all his aeons, and they exist in this perfect pleroma, right? But then this one bitch, this one aeon, by the name of Sophia, decided to create a baby, and she did it without the father's permission, right? She was like, I want to make my own beautiful thing, right? And it turned into this thing called the demiurge. And there's many different depictions of this. The one that I've seen the most commonly is like a snake with like a lion's head. Yeah, this guy here. So this is the actual creator of the universe. And the reason he's so big boy angry is because he was created, and then God was like, I don't fucking like that. Get that out of my sight, right? And he like banished it from the Pleroma, right? So he was kicked out of this perfect world. And then he decided, oh, I'll just create my own Pleroma, right? And he tried it, and because he's like ugly and bad, he couldn't do it right, right? And that thing that he tried to create is our world, right? And then he created humans inside of that world because he wanted them to like, he wanted to create his own aeons, essentially, right? So he did that, and then because it's an imperfect world, there's suffering, and it's his fault. But apparently, God, capital G, wants the humans to be able to come back to the Pleroma, right? So he has essentially gave humans a spark of divinity so that they could if they could overcome this fucker's garbage world, they could eventually rejoin the Pleroma. And according to Gnosticism, Jesus is that original son that I diagrammed here, right? And then he decided he was going to leave the Pleroma and go into the fucked up world and be like, hey, y'all can make it, you know? Like, this world sucks.
So that's Satan.
Yes, but he's also God. He created the world, right? It basically says Gnosticism, essentially the way that it tries to describe the reason that the world has like sparks of divinity, but is also a place of like immense suffering, right? It describes that by basically saying the world that we exist in was created by an imperfect God, right? It goes against the original concept of Christianity that says like, you know, God created the world and like sin infiltrated it, right? Like it was originally this perfect place, but then Satan made Eve eat the apple and then it got all fucked up, right? Gnosticism does away with that entirely and is like, no. This world was made by essentially Giga Satan, God, Snake, Lion, Man,
Yeah.
right?
I wonder who came up with that shit even. Like, where do you get your... Like, how do you know?
I don't know. But it was close up.
But at the same time, who was it that made the original idea too, right?
Some of them are written by the apostles of Jesus, but I think there is a thing called the Apocrypha of John. I think is where this popped up. Yeah. So it's called either the Apocrypha of John, the Secret Book of John, or the Secret Revelation of John. And there's another one that's like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is where one of these came up with. Basically, after Jesus was big killed, right? All these people that had known him in life were trying to piece it all together, right? They're trying to piece together how it all works, right? And they came up with different ideas. And there's like a ton of Gospels of the Bible that are not included in the official Bible, right? Like there's a Gospel of Judas, for example, right? Like one that was apparently written by Judas. And that one is funny because in that one it describes like when Jesus was a kid, right? That he was just a total asshole. But he had like godlike powers. So there's this one part in the book where like this kid like Jesus like gets mad at this kid and they're like playing on a roof and he like pushes him off the roof and kills him and like his parents get mad so Jesus just like resurrects the kid from the dead. It's like, see, it's fine. But anyway, that one there's like a lot of books that didn't make it into the Bible, right? Because people were just going sicko mode, writing whatever they felt like, right? And one of these is this Apocrypha of John, and basically in the Apocrypha of John, I think it was Mary or like John the apostle had a revelation that was essentially explaining Gnosticism. Right? So this book here is included in the Gnostic canon, but it's not included in like the Bible proper. Right?
Oh, I see.
It's basically how it worked after every like few hundred years or so, you'd have all these like religious leaders that would come together and they'd look over all the religious books and they'd basically be like, you know, this one fits in with the Bible, this one not so much, right?
Yeah.
You know, the one where Jesus kills kids for fun, not going to the Bible, right? Like,
yeah.
But yeah, it essentially came from that. And then the Gnostics kind of ran wild with it. But it does bear some relation to Hermeticism as well, because Hermeticism basically says that since humans, or if you take the intersection of Hermeticism and Gnosticism, it basically says that since humans have this like spark of divinity given to them by the Pleroma Man, that they can essentially influence the imperfect world and like make it a little more perfect. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's a good place to stop.
Yeah. How long have I been streaming? An hour?
Yeah, an hour. And we can upload this video, and
That's true.
we show all of our fans.
All of our 3 viewers. Which thanks for stopping by, guys.
I'm one of the viewers.
I think I have too.
So we got one guy. Let's go.
I hope you enjoyed one guy. Let us know. Let us know if you're in here. Let us know if there's anything you want to expand upon before we end.
But yeah, so I think I'm gonna go get some food and probably get to door dashing.
All right.
All right. Well, good podcast. Good podcast.
Indeed. All right.
All right. I'll see you
We'll have
later.
another one. See you later.
Another one Sunday.
Another one Sunday, I think. Yeah.
Okay.